Hey guys, Jen here with Serenity Hill Farmstead. I am out on the farm this morning and just taking a look around and seeing what all is starting to pop up in this wonderfully warm spring weather that I'm so happy is here. But I noticed that we have mullein popping up and I'm really excited for mullein. It is one of my favorite herbs. So let's talk about mullein. Here is a small patch of mullein here. And this mullein is in its second year. Mullein is what we call a biennial plant. That means it takes 2 years to complete its life cycle. So in the first year, it comes up looking like this. It just stays pretty low to the ground and it leaves out. In the second year, which is what all of this here is, it is gonna start coming up and end up looking like a rosette. Let's see if I can find one. I think this is probably the best one here. You see how it stays pretty tight in the center. It'll do this and it'll get pretty big and then it'll shoot up. Now the part that shoots up is actually a stalk that comes up from the center of the plant and gets about 6 feet high. And the leaves do grow up that stalk, but at the top of the plant, there is a beautiful flower, and that's how it seeds itself for the following years. And then after that year, that plant is done, and we'll go ahead here and harvest it for the root and the flowers and the leaves. We'll harvest the entire thing, and we'll plant from seed for the next following year. So on our farm, we have first year and second year mullein growing every single year. Now mullein is a very, very common plant. It's not native to the US, but it is here everywhere. We're back in the trees because it's windy again. So mullein is actually not native to the United States, but it's everywhere around here. We find it in ditches all over the place. You probably pass by it all the time and don't even realize what it is. If you're in the Midwest and you've ever driven past a field that has a bunch of random stalks sticking up, that's likely mullein that you are driving past. In farmlands like where we live, it is actually a nuisance to most commercial farms and they spray it and kill it, which is an absolute shame. But because it is considered so invasive and it is such just kind of a big pain in the butt for so many people that don't know what they're looking at and don't know what they're using, unless you're in an area that you know does not spray using any kinds of herbicides and pesticides, you don't want to harvest it wild. It grows really, really well in wastelands area that doesn't have really rich soil, so you can find it in ditches and on the edges of roadways. And it's actually really easy to grow in your garden. As long as you're staying on top of your crop, you shouldn't have a big invasive issue with it. So using mullein medicinally, it has a ton of properties. And commonly when you look up mullein, what you see is the use of the leaf, but you can actually use the leaf, the flower, and the root, all for different purposes. So first talking about the properties of mullein, it is a demulcent, and it's an expectorant, it's a great lung tonic, it is an antiviral, antibacterial, and anti-inflammatory. So the leaves, as I mentioned, they're most commonly known for respiratory struggles and conditions, and rightfully so, because they have a soothing and hydrating effect on the lungs and balance the mucous membranes in there so they're not overproducing or underproducing the mucus that helps regulate the respiratory system. It also has an expectorant, which means it basically thins and helps move the excess mucus out of the lung. So it does a lot of different kind of dual purpose, multi-purpose things in the lungs to help the lungs, the whole respiratory system, return to kind of a homeostasis. So historically, mullein was used to smoke. I think in a lot of indigenous cultures and over in Europe and just kind of like old folk herbalism, a lot of herbalists still to this day will recommend smoking mullein. Now personally, I do not recommend smoking any kind of herb because if you do have any kind of underlying lung issue, asthma, emphysema, COPD, it could absolutely irritate just having the smoke. Even if it is a medicinal smoke, having that in could absolutely trigger you. Some people would be triggered, some people it could work for. But when it comes to smoking and respiratory things, I always err on the side of caution and do not recommend smoking mullein. So to use mullein leaf, typically I use it in an infusion or a decoction. You can make a tincture out of it, and we have, but typically herbs that have mucilagenic properties in it, things that help stimulate the mucus, those typically don't tincture well. While we have done it, and it does hold several medicinal properties in it, the best way that we've used it is in infusions and decoctions. The next part of mullein I want to talk about that I feel like is really underrated and people just, they don't utilize it, or really appreciate it or understand it, is the root of mullein. So mullein root carries antispasmodic properties with it, and it is a fabulous pain reliever for very specific types of pain. So as I've talked in other videos, I have an autoimmune arthritis called ankylosing spondylitis. Mullein root is wonderful for low back pain, and specifically pain in the rib cage. Now, along with my AS comes a wonderfully painful and awful condition called costochondritis. So when you get flares, when you get autoimmune flares, and I know several other conditions come with this fun inflammatory condition also. But basically what that is the space in between the ribs that swells up. It gets really angry, gets really inflamed, and it's very painful. It's hard to breathe. You feel like you're having a heart attack. In fact, I've gone to the emergency room thinking I'm having heart problems, and it was actually just my costochondritis flaring up. And it's a really, really good herb to tincture, or you can make a glyceride. You can make it in a tea and into an infusion decoction also. But I really like to use it in tincture. We do use a lot of tinctures in our household and use that for pain control and inflammation control when I'm having a flare. So most of my flares are isolated to my spine and my rib cage. So when I'm having that, this is the perfect thing for me. And the last part of it you can use is the flowers. So in that second year, when that stem shoots up, you'll get all of these beautifully, very, very bright yellow flowers. And that's where your seeds are. Now you want to avoid the use of the seeds because the seeds contain some things that can be toxic, some compounds that can be toxic. So once those flowers have popped up, then you can go ahead and harvest them. And the best way to use mullein flowers is actually in an oil infusion. So they have a very specific job, and that is to work in the ears. They do a fantastic job of relieving ear pain. You know, mullein, we talked about the root, has some of those pain relieving qualities. The flowers work fantastic relieving ear pain. People use them with ear aches and with ear infections with a lot of success. So you just put the flowers inside olive oil and you leave it to sit for 4 weeks, and then you strain it out and use it. So when you are using that oil, you just want to put just a drop or two in the ear at a time and just kind of rub it in like this. Now, really important to note though, if you suspect eardrum rupture, which usually comes with draining from the ears and a whole lot of pain, you definitely don't want to be putting anything in the ears. That is a medical emergency. You definitely want to go to the doctor for that. So now that the wind has settled down a little bit, I'm going to walk back down and I'm going to talk to you about how to harvest mullein. Now, when I'm harvesting mullein, what I will do is I will take the leaves all the way around the plant. So in these second years, when the rosette's popping up, I will just continue to take the outside leaves and leaves going up the stalk. And I will leave these because these will continue to produce. You see that little baby leaf popping up right there? That'll continue to produce and put out bigger leaves. So when I'm pulling these leaves, ones that I don't want to have in my apothecary are ones that look like this. Any brown or damaged leaves, this is not something we want as medicine, so we will compost this. So when you are harvesting your mullein, to dry it, we will cut down the vein, down the center vein, and spread everything out. If we're doing a lot of mullein and I don't have the room to dehydrate all of that at one time in the dehydrators, to dry them, we'll make sure we have a lot of good ventilation. I usually keep fans on them, and we'll just slit down this center vein, and that thins up the bulkiest part of the plant and it helps it evenly dry. Now, if you are trying to dry mullein and you end up getting brown patches in your mullein when it is dry, just take that section off and discard that. That is not something that you want. You still want it to be a nice vibrant green when you have fresh dried herb. That is my information on mullein. I hope that you found it helpful and useful, and that when you find mullein out in the wild, you think about it in a whole new light and all the possibilities that it holds. We'll see you guys. Okay, we'll see you guys in the next video. Bye.